Hello everybody, my name is Clive Mono Mukundu, Zimbabwean guitarist and music producer and God's favorite guitarist. This year, 2025, I'm celebrating 37 years in the music industry, and I'll be hosting different videos to celebrate this milestone. And today, I'm going to share with you an interview that I did with Sister Zai Zanda. Sister Zai is a Zimbabwean poet based in Australia, and there in Australia she's part of a radio station called 3CR Community Radio, and she hosts a program. And she hosts a program. And she hosts a program called Inity Riddims, which is a reggae program. So, since this is a reggae program, we are going to be talking about reggae music. And for those of you who do not know, I started in the music industry when I was still in primary school. And this is my very first songbook. And it is over 100 songs, and all the songs in this book are reggae songs. But of course, every time I talk about my years in the music industry, I start from 1988 when I joined the music industry professionally. So here I was talking about the years before I joined the music industry professionally. So a year before I joined the music industry, I decided to quit reggae music because I wanted to be identified with a local music genre. And the funny thing, or the paradox of the matter, is that I got that idea from reggae music itself. So I'm going to be explaining in this interview how I got that idea from reggae music to start appreciating our own Zimbabwean music. So this interview is going to be different, of course, because this time I'm not the one asking people questions. This time I'm the one who is being asked questions. So the format is different, but still there's a lot of information in the interview. So sit back and relax, and thank you very much.
Monoversation.
Today I'm joined in the studio with Clive Mono Mukundu, a legend of the Zimbabwean music industry, self-described. No, you're not even self-described. You are a guitarist.
When we talk of self-description, I describe myself as God's favorite guitarist.
Hey, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
A God's favorite guitarist.
Yeah.
A producer as well.
Mm.
So I should actually say that we're in Manolio Studios right now.
Exactly.
In Harare, where so many people have recorded.
Yeah.
Countless international acts, countless local acts. You're probably one of the remaining of a generation of phenomenal musicians from the 80s and the 90s. You've played in bands like with Ana Oliver Tukudzi, who is very popular in Australia. But I'm curious, did you also play with Thomas Mapfumo?
Just one show.
Just one show.
And all along, people have been saying, Mono played for Oliver Tukudzi, played for Thomas Mapfumo, and they will include him on a long list, but I just played with him on one show only.
Wow.
And that was in 2018.
Really?
Yeah, because his guitarists were delayed on flights. So I was called in to cover up for them. But he once approached me in 2001, but I did not like the idea of living in the States. I've always wanted to live in Zimbabwe. So that's why I did not take the offer.
This is a question that I have for you, and I think it's maybe something that I'll ask you a little later on in our interview about why you prefer to live in Zimbabwe. Because I want to start first by giving people a bit of context about who you are, because they know you're a musician, but your relationship to reggae, because you did end up in Jamaica quite recently. And so I want to talk about your experience as a Zimbabwean musician traveling to Jamaica, because I think what people in Australia may not be aware of is that there's a very strong link between Jamaica and Jamaica. And as somebody who has such a deep history and has such deep relationships with some of the legends in the Zimbabwean music scene, I feel like you're the right person to ask about that relationship of our Zimbabwean music, our heritage of music here, and the Jamaican connection? Like, how did that even come about?
Okay, first of all, we all know of Bob Marley, and Bob Marley used to write a lot of songs that were Pan-Africanist. So our own freedom fighters in Zimbabwe, they also used to use his music as inspiration. That is why on our Independence Day in 1980, he was invited by the Zimbabwe government to come and perform. So when he came to perform in Zimbabwe, the relationship became even stronger, because before he came, it was only the freedom fighters who knew about him, but ordinary people did not know about him. So when he came to Zimbabwe and performed, he performed 2 shows for free. And he even sponsored himself, his own trip. He paid for himself, and he was not paid. He performed for free. So the ordinary people in Zimbabwe, they connected with him, and they connected with reggae music. And that's how they connected with Jamaica as a country. So from 1980, Zimbabwean people, they fell in love with reggae music. And I remember from the 80s, I think up to the late 90s, it was an unwritten rule that whenever a band performs, they had to have a reggae section during their set list, even if it was not a reggae band. No matter what genre you played, you definitely had to have a period where you give time to reggae music. That was the unwritten rule in Zimbabwe since the 1980s. So because of that, Zimbabwe and Jamaica became connected, and every time Jamaican artists came to perform in Zimbabwe, they got very huge responses, and we hosted artists like Dennis Brown, Gregor Isaacs, Culture, Mistin Roots from the UK. Even some members of Mistin Roots even stayed behind and started a band called Transit Crew, which was a very popular band. I remember I produced, I think, 2 projects for Transit Crew. So basically, that's the relationship between Zimbabwe and Jamaica.
That is a strong relationship.
It's a very strong relationship.
I've heard some of those stories, but you filled in some gaps that I hadn't quite known of, that there was an unspoken rule that you had to have a small segment of your set just devoted to reggae.
Yeah.
So you, as a musician, as a guitarist who was playing, what songs do you remember playing? What reggae songs do you remember playing back then?
The most popular ones were like Bob Marley's song called Zimbabwe. And there's a song by Dennis Brown called Funny Feeling. It was a very popular song in Zimbabwe, as well as Gregor Isaacs' song called Substitute. I remember of all the reggae songs that were played in Zimbabwe, those 3 were the most popular songs, and they were the most requested during shows. So if you didn't play any of those 3 and other reggae songs, you could get in trouble during live shows. So you had to play any of those 3 and any other, especially Bob Marley songs.
This is so beautiful. I had a conversation probably about a year ago now with Marla Brown, the daughter of Dennis Brown, who's carrying on his legacy. And she said to me, my mom and my dad went to Zimbabwe a lot. But it was at the end of the interview. So now you're making me go, did they come to your studio?
No, that time I was still a kid, but I also fell in love with reggae. I remember, especially from 1983, that's when I really got deep into reggae music. And I even had a dream of becoming a reggae musician. And I remember my first songbook, I still have it right now. The first 100 songs that I wrote were all reggae music songs. That's why in 2013, when I celebrated 25 years in the music industry, I went back to that book, songbook, and took out 10 songs which I released. That was my first reggae album then. So basically, before I entered the music industry, my dream was to become a reggae musician. But later on, you know, with reggae music is always talking about respecting your culture, love your culture. So because of listening to reggae, I started thinking about my own culture, and then started falling in love with my culture, with my music. Then I decided, you know what, let me identify with Zimbabwean music. But up to now, my favorite genre of music is still reggae.
When you were, we met, I've been following you online for 10 years now, probably 12. But when I actually met you in person at the Harare Open Book Festival, you said that reggae had such an impact on you as a young person growing up in the ghetto. And so can you explain that impact that it had on you? What was that influence? How did it change you as a person?
Reggae had a huge impact on me as a person in terms of my confidence, in terms of my self-love. Before reggae music was popular in Zimbabwe, people were so much into American music, like R&B, like pop music, like the Michael Jackson and so forth. And you know, as youngsters, if you fall in love with the type of music, you love to dress like the artists. And the dressing that was demanded or that was expected of people that loved music like Michael Jackson's music was expensive for people like us who were in the ghetto. So because of that, you end up with a low self-esteem. Number two, your English is not very British. Because, you know, in Zimbabwe, your English accent or your fluency in English is sort of like regarded as intellectual. If you're a good English speaker, you are intelligent. If your
apparently, apparently,
that was the belief. Up to now, the belief is still there, but not as much as it was in the 80s and the 90s. So I had a lot of reasons for feeling insecure. One, my English was very Zimbabwean. I've got a very strong Zimbabwean accent. Number two, we didn't know we have clothes. And around the time when you're a teenager, you want to impress the girls with clothes and you don't have the clothes. Now, when reggae music became popular, number one, reggae music doesn't emphasize much on dressing with expensive clothes. You can dress any way you want and you just put your Pan-African colors and you are looking cool already. So that alone gave me a lot of confidence. If you look at the reggae's biggest superstars, people like Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, they never dressed in expensive clothes. Bob Marley was just simple, just dressing his jeans. And because of that, if you were not rich and you just dress in your jeans and simple clothes, you started feeling confident and secure. And then number three, if you listen to Jamaicans speak, they use a lot of broken English, but with confidence. So I started to look at that and watching them, copying them. And within a short time, I was feeling very confident about myself. I remember when I was at Fakosa 3, I think I was one of the worst dressed school kids at school, but the most confident of them all. And people were surprised why girls were getting drawn to me, because girls love people who are confident. So they were surprised, how come girls like you, but you don't have nice clothes? But it was because of that confidence I was getting from reggae music. And then lastly, reggae music also taught me to fight for my rights. Because I remember those days at school, corporal punishment was very huge in schools, and sometimes teachers would just beat you for no reason, just because you came from home with a bad mood, and you could just be beaten for very simple reasons. I remember I used to stand up for my rights a lot. So I can safely say that reggae music really shaped my teenage years in a very positive way. Up to now, I still have that confidence. I'm very secure about myself.
That's beautiful to hear. That's really beautiful and profound. When you're talking about yourself as a teenager, I'm just trying to put a timeline, if I may, because I know you started out as a musician in 88.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the early 80s. So this is just after Bob Marley came to our first Independence Day celebration, 1980, flew his band in, left equipment, I hear, as well.
Yeah, he left his equipment in Zimbabwe.
A real act of Pan-African solidarity. So those are the years that you were growing up, listening to reggae music, feeling confident in yourself.
But the moment that I really fell in love with reggae music so much is from 1983. That was 3 years after he left. That's when I really got hooked to reggae music.
And what was that? Was it the Transit Crew, the Misty and Roots people who stayed?
Transit Crew was not yet there. Because Transit Crew, I think, was formed around 1987, 88, somewhere there. But it was just through listening to reggae music. You know, that time everybody was playing reggae in Zimbabwe, especially in the high-density suburbs, in the ghettos. Everybody was playing reggae music. So you just get caught up in the moment. And when I started listening to the lyrics and looking at the culture of those that loved reggae music, because reggae music is always talking about peace. So I've always watched people who love reggae music and all the Rastas. They are very peaceful people, very respectful. As a result, you just end up falling in love with the music and with the culture. I think that's how I got hooked to reggae music.
What does the reggae music culture look like in Zim? Because, I mean, we just saw a mighty legend land here as part of the Africa tour, the legendary Burning Spear, greeted by, you know, a Rastafari community that's actually in Zim. Can you give us some insight into like how that has evolved, the you know, the reggae culture, the Rasta culture?
Yeah, reggae is very much linked to the Rastafari movement, either as a religion or as a philosophy. So that religion and that philosophy, it really impacted a lot of people in Zimbabwe, and a lot of people subscribe to that philosophy. I'm sure you can even look at our colloquial language in Zimbabwe. A lot of people call each other Rasta, Magadi Rasta, Zirise Rasta. It shows that reggae music had a huge impact on the culture of Zimbabwe. And that's why even up to now, I think one of the most popular genres for the youth right now, it's Zim Dancehall, which is an offshoot of Jamaican reggae music. So in Zimbabwe, there's I don't know about the numbers, about the quantifiable numbers, but there's a good number of Rasta people in Zimbabwe, and also a bigger number of people who just subscribe to the philosophies of Rastafarianism and reggae music.
Do you find, this is just me, I don't know if you agree with me, but I often find that the Rasta philosophy is very similar to our Ulu philosophy as well. Oneness, togetherness, I am because you are, I and I.
I agree with you 100%. I think that is the reason why reggae music was very much accepted by Zimbabweans, by a lot of people in Africa. Because our cultures in Africa, most of them, generally, they are similar. So the values that they emphasize in reggae music are the same values that I emphasize in our own culture.
Yeah.
And even musically, we've got some music which sounds very much like reggae music. Like if you listen to that's a reggae beat. But it's a song that was composed centuries ago, even before white people came to Zimbabwe. So we've got a number of things that are in common between Zimbabwean culture and Jamaican culture. And even if you listen to the Naya Bengi drumming, it's fair. There's a lot of Zimbabwean elements, a lot of African elements. You can feel that drum in a lot of music across Africa. So because of that and the messages that they always preach, you know that reggae music is always talking about Africa. And even when the artists come to Zimbabwe and other parts of Africa, they are different from American artists. American artists, they come with a pompous attitude. They don't want to mix with people. They take themselves too seriously, like big celebrities. But when reggae musicians come to Africa and Zimbabwe, they are so simple, very respectful. They mingle with anybody. I've got pictures of Bob Marley sitting in Rufaro Stadium, seated with ordinary people like ice cream vendors and everybody. Even when Luciano came to Zimbabwe, he collaborated with Japreza, and I'm the one who produced the song. My wife was asking me who he was when he entered our house. I told him it's Luciano, and she couldn't believe it. And she was saying, how come he's so humble? And I told her, that's the nature of Jamaican roots reggae musicians. I haven't interacted much with the dancehall artists from Jamaica, but I've interacted with some roots reggae artists. They are very respectful. Their culture is very African. The way they respect people is very, very African. So it's very easy for Zimbabweans to fall in love with Jamaicans and their culture.
And vice versa. I met Luciano in Melbourne in 2007, and so humble, so warm, so welcoming. There was no sort of celebrity, front or anything. So everything that you're saying is, and I was shocked. I wasn't expecting him to be so open. But the same with Bushman. And I think when they find out that I'm from Zimbabwe, there's even more of
rapport.
Yeah. There's from the Jamaican side too. So, you're from Zimbabwe. So there is a sense even there that Zimbabwe holds a special place within their philosophy, within their sense of history. So when you went over to Jamaica, I want to talk about how they experienced you and how they received you as a Zimbabwean who is now, a musician who has this deep history in the Zimbabwe music industry. How were you received over there?
We were received very well.
Caveman and Mono.
And one thing that really surprised me is how popular our former president Robert Mugabe is. That's one thing that really shocked me, because every time I told people that I'm from Zimbabwe, they'll say, you're from Robert Mugabe's country.
Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe.
And some of them, they don't even know that he's late. Some of them think he's still alive. They will ask you, how is Robert Mugabe? We love that man, blah, blah, blah. So I was treated very well. Like I've said before, Jamaicans are very welcoming, very humble.
Yeah.
And it was a music conference called the Island Music Conference. And one thing that impressed me is that all the big artists in Jamaica were there. They don't have that mind of thinking that just because they are celebrities, they cannot mingle with everybody. Because you could see yourself sitting next to Shaggy, Mutabaruka, Biniman, Sean Paul, and then you see new artists who are just starting into the music industry, but they were sitting together, listening to whoever was speaking. You don't find that in Zimbabwe. Because in Zimbabwe, once an artist gets any amount of fame, you won't see them at conferences and even at red carpet events. They sort of like live a hermit lifestyle where they shun society and live in their own cocoon. And I always ask myself, isn't that depressing? Because, and that's not how our artists before this digital era used to behave. All of them, because you could find him at other artist shows. I remember I introduced him to a young saxophonist called Joseph Shinori. And Joseph would hold these shows in town, and all of them would come in and attend. But Joseph was just a young boy. But the current artists that we have right now, they don't want to mix with people. Once they become popular, they want to isolate themselves. So that's one thing that I learned from the Jamaicans. They attended the conference, and it was a 5-day conference, I think, and every day it was packed.
Do you think it's maybe because of social media?
In Jamaica, they are coming, but they also have social media. In America, they also attend conferences, they attend red carpet events, they mingle. You will see, you can see a top artist in another artist's show, learning from others. But in Zimbabwe, you don't see that. So we cannot blame social media, because if it was because of social media, I think social media is even bigger in America, Jamaica, and other places. But I don't know why the current artists in Zimbabwe don't want to mix with people or even mix with other musicians. Because right now, from the way I'm noticing, even some of our top acts, their live performances is not improving. Because they don't see other musicians. They don't learn from others. They're just in their small cocoon and they only watch their own shows. They don't watch other artists perform. And it's dangerous because if you are put on stage in a country where people don't know your music, for example, you are taken to Brazil, no one knows your songs. Your songs are not hits in Brazil. You can't perform. Because performing for people who know your music can damage your performance. Because anything you do, people will just clap hands. Even if your stage performance is loud, they'll just clap hands because they know the song. But performing for people who do not know your music, it will require something more. Yeah.
Very true. Very, very true. I mean, those are massive conversations that I think need to be had about maybe also around the issue of self-esteem, because we are a country that was born out of a white supremacist government of Ian Smith that really wanted to oppress and, make Black folks feel like they were less than. And, you know, you've already explained some of the things that you were going through as a young person. We didn't connect it directly to that system of color bar that we had in Zimbabwe, apartheid that we had in Zimbabwe. And the messages that we've received over the years about what it means to be Black versus what it means to be white. And also how that links in with class standing, how much money you have, how much money you don't have. The fact that our suburbs were built and planned according to racial groupings. And the darker you were, the fewer services you were given, right? No water, no electricity, no garbage collection, no fresh food. So, and you were made to feel as if you deserved that because of the color of the skin. So we're coming from that. We don't talk about it here.
Yeah.
We haven't had that conversation, I feel, in this country yet, as they would have had like within the Rastafari communities, about loving yourself and having confidence. And even if as a poet, I think of Miss Lou, she was the poet who really pushed for Jamaican people to respect their folklore, to respect patois, and to use patois in their cultural productions, and not just the Queen's English, so to speak. So some of the musicians that I've spoken to from Jamaica have said, it's that pride in patois. It's that pride in our culture. It's that pride in our folklore, which then takes them back to the pride in Africa. Is that pride in being African? We're not taught to be proud to be African.
Yeah, true.
Here. It doesn't come easy.
That I asked, it was the 5-day conference had a number of segments. And I made sure that I participated a lot in every segment. So on one segment, I asked one of the panelists, and I said, your population is very small, 3 million people, but your music has impacted the world. What are your secrets? And he said, I might not know about the other secrets, but one of our biggest secrets is we are proud of who we are. We are confident about ourselves. That's one thing that lags a lot in the southern parts of Africa. That's what he said. And I find that to be very true. Because Jamaicans are very confident people. Very confident. Jamaicans, African Americans, and Nigerians. And coincidentally, they come from the same region. That's where most of the Black slaves that went to Jamaica and America comes from West Africa. So I think the southern part of Africa, there is need for us to be taught as children about the self-love, about being proud of who you are, because I think it lacks a lot this part of the world.
You mentor a lot of artists, I'm sure, as well.
Yes.
So did you pick up any tips while you're over at the Island Music Festival?
A lot.
That pertain to how to have a pride in our own music. How can our own reggae have a Zimbabwean feel to it as well? I mean, I think we've kind of managed that to an extent.
Yeah, it's only one band that managed to really do that successfully. It's a band called Zigzag Band. If you know songs like Gomara Masare, Mzimu Mkuru, and so forth. But unfortunately, the majority of them passed away. And they created a reggae, a subgenre that they called Chigio. And it became very popular. But after the band disbanded, after most of the members passed away, we have not had any Chigio band. We just have a few artists who include a Chigio song. Maybe on an album of 10 songs, maybe they just have 1 or 2 Chigio songs. But I would have wished to have a complete band that is just known as a Chigio band. Because in Zimbabwe, we've got a lot of artists who created new subgenres that were very new. Because you know what happens with music is every artist has got his own distinct sound that identifies them from the other artists. But that distinct sound can be developed until it creates a new subgenre. Now, when it becomes a subgenre, it can now be used by different artists. I can give an example of Jamaica. The one who created what we now call dancehall music was a man known as Count Machuki. After Count Machuki, U-Roy. After U-Roy, we now have everybody from Yellow Man to Sean Paul. But it started off sort of like as a distinct sound that was identified with Count Machuki. and then it was developed into a sub-genre. The same thing with dub music. It was pioneered by a man called King Tubby, but it was developed into a sub-genre. And then we ended up with artists like Scientist, a Professor, yeah, exactly, who became popular with that sub-genre. So when it comes to Zimbabwe, we've got a lot of artists who created their own sub-genres that could be adopted by different artists. And one of them is that Chigio sound.
I had no idea. That is sad that I had no idea. But thank you for being a cultural custodian, historian as well. You know?
Thank you.
So when you're mentoring your students, your mentees, do you explain that to them? And did you see other Jamaicans doing that as well?
Yeah, in Jamaica, they've got a mentoring culture, a very strong mentoring culture. Because I've noticed that every time Jamaican artists come to perform in Zimbabwe anyway, they always come with somebody who is still new, who opens up for them. They've got a very strong mentoring culture. So in Zimbabwe, I think it's one thing that we need to adopt as well, where you just find a youngster who is new, moving with him around, and you can use him to do sound check, and he'll be also gaining experience. Because even when Morgan Heritage came here, which year was it? 2018? I don't remember who opened. I think it was one of their grandchildren or one of their children. Is the one they used for sound check. And by the time they came on stage, the sound was already set, but it was also good for him. So it's a win-win situation. It will be a good platform for the young men to stand in front of a huge crowd. It's good for you because by the time you come on stage, the sound is already okay. So, but basically my point is in Zimbabwe, we need to adopt that mentorship culture because it's very beneficial and it ensures that your music and your culture is carried on in the next generations.
Now that you say that, I actually can see, even with the Malis, they came with their children. The children danced on the stage. You can see that in the footage from the Independence Day celebrations. Now those very same children are bringing their children onto the stage and mentoring them.
Skip Mali,
you know,
and all those other kids.
And you've got the studio, and you've got other people coming through. That's amazing. And you see the same with Barris Hammond is doing the same with his children as well. You're very right. Do you think that there's something in Zimbabwe that has maybe stopped us from having that mentoring culture?
I think we do have a culture that doesn't support that idea a lot. And I don't know where it comes from. As people that were colonized, it could come from colonization, it would come from our education system. I was speaking to another educationist and he was saying that the way our education system was structured was not very
collaborative.
Yeah, because you were put in classes like, even if you're in class, there's group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4. So everybody's trying to be number one. And if you are not in grade 7A on group number 1, you are not given that much attention. And if you are in group 4, in grade 7D, you are considered dumb. And so there's sort of a very unhealthy type of competition. So I think maybe it comes from our education. I don't know how much they've changed the education system, but that element, I think it really affected how we perceive a lot of things.
When I was coming up, I thought the same. I had the same experience, and I had the experience of being placed in the A students class and all my friends being placed in the B students class and losing those friendships as a result. And that was a very painful situation and very confusing for me as well, why they didn't want to play with me anymore. Well, maybe 10, 11 years old, you know? Yeah. So there is definitely something in the way that our education system is structured that breaks down bonds, relationships, that encourages competition over sharing and supporting one another when someone isn't doing so great, instead of like making a mockery of them or teasing them.
Very true.
We do that a lot here, unfortunately.
And have you noticed that
we support them?
There was a huge difference between what was called Group A schools education and Group B schools
Very.
education a huge difference. Because I noticed the difference when I was in grade 6. I attended 2 Group A schools. When I was in grade 6, my second term and my third term, I attended 2 Group A schools, and I was amazed at the difference. Because number one, in Group A schools, they did not encourage that type of competition. Number two, if one was not performing well in school, in Group B schools, you were beaten up, brutalized by the teachers, called all sorts of names, and your self-esteem will be crushed. But in Group A schools, where white people and rich people used to go, if a child is not doing well in school, they'll look for what is known as a remedial teacher that will cater for those that are not doing very well. And they will not call them names. They make sure that their self-esteem is left in check. Those teachers will be specially trained for such children. So in Group B schools, there was a lot of beatings, and sometimes you wonder why you were getting beaten. You could be beaten up if you did not have a school uniform, but it's not your fault. It's your parents who are supposed to buy you the school uniform. You could be beaten up because we're using a left hand when you were expected to use the right hand. You could be beaten up because you were slow in answering like mathematical questions. I remember when we were in grade 7, there was a teacher. He would put us in a queue, in a line, and he'd ask you questions quickly. 5 times 7. If you are slow, you are beaten up. Go back to the back of the line. If he asks you a question, if you answer, you go into class. So if you are slow, you go round and round getting beaten until he's tired, and then you get into class. So because of that, your self-esteem is crushed, and even if you are good at something that is not academic, you find that you just think yourself as dumb overall. And also, it did not encourage critical thinking. It encouraged memory. You just had to memorize cumulonimbus clouds. You had to memorize the parts of a, what do you call a wizard? What do you call a wizard in English?
Wizard is it's not a lizard, is it? It's a wizard is a, I don't know, a wizard.
Wizard. I think that education, it really impacted how we view life as Zimbabweans.
No, that's so true. I've been reflecting a lot on my education experience as well. I mean, I came when schools were forced to integrate. But even then, when I think back to my friends who were left behind, when I look at that class, it was mostly the black kids and the colored kids, you know? So even then, there was still a form of apartheid working in some of the A schools, I feel.
Yeah.
That is my, but so either way, your self-esteem does take a knock.
It does.
Because when you're even when you're in the A stream class as a black student, I was brought up to the front a lot. I was punished a lot. I was spoken down to a lot. It was supposed to break me. But my parents would then ask my
Also, you
uncle,
went to a Group A school?
I did.
Okay.
And my parents...
Which one?
I went to convent and then I went to Arundel's. But this is mostly a convent that I experienced that's very young. Because you're young, it's your formative years. So you're being taught that you're stupid or that there's something wrong with you. But my parents would always have my uncle doing homework with us at the end of the day. And it's through him, that was the remedial aspect. So it's through that I never internalized the idea that I'm stupid or that I'm incapable. And I think there was one time when he actually did my maths homework for me and sent me back to class with the maths homework he'd done for me. And my teacher still graded it all incorrect. Yes. And then the same thing happened to me in high school with my geography teacher. And she was eventually, then by that time, I was a little smarter. I complained and the headmistress apologized to me and they fired her. But that was the system that was in place in Rhodesia, where the black students who did end up going, let's say to the University of Rhodesia or something like that, they would not be given the same attention as the white students.
Very true.
So there were always obstacles and barriers put in your way. And then you were made to think that you were stupid, not that they had purposely made it harder for you to succeed.
It was always your fault.
It was always your fault. So I'm wondering, like, how that feeds then in. And this is just speculation, you know, I'm not a qualified sociologist, but, you know, I live in the culture.
Yeah. Even me, I'm not a qualified psychologist or sociologist, but I read a lot.
Yeah.
So the other time I was reading about the education system, it must be Hungary. They produced a lot of scientists in that country. And one of the reasons was that their education promoted critical thinking and problem solving. And they also had mentorship programs. The same thing was happening in Germany as well. That's why after the Second World War, the American government had a program they called Operation Paperclip, where they gave citizenships to Hitler's scientists. All the other Nazis were imprisoned and executed. The scientists were spared because they were very intelligent, because of the way the school system was structured in Germany. So I think the school systems needs to be structured in a way that encourages self-esteem and critical thinking. It's good for the nation.
With critical, I think so too. I would agree with that. And with critical thinking, I think also creativity, no?
Exactly.
Because that's part of it. Is that you become a creative thinker instead of a rote learner. And how does that affect our music?
Remember, we're talking about self-esteem.
Yes.
Because if you lack self-esteem, you look down upon yourself. And if you see someone doing better, you'd rather have that than have your own. And we've got that problem a lot right now in Zimbabwe. Remember, I mentioned that every artist can have his own sound. For example, reggae. There's Peter Tosh, there's Bob Marley, there's Bunny Wailer. They were friends. They were in the same band. But you can easily tell that this is Peter Tosh. There are some distinct elements in the way he sang and in the way his instruments were played that identifies him as Peter Tosh. We call that sound. That's the Peter Tosh sound. And then there was the Bob Marley sound. Then there was the Bunny Wailer sound. Even in Zimbabwe, if we look at Sungura music before the digital era, there was the Leonard Dembo sound, the Yorangwena sound, the Penka Udzoke sound. All those sounds were totally different, but the parent genre was Sungura. But right now, as we speak, when we talk of Sungura, if you listen to Radio Zimbabwe, everybody's trying to sound like Macheso. And that's an element of low self-esteem as well. Because you don't believe in yourself, you don't believe in what you can create. So you would rather have Alec Macheso Chirimi because you don't believe in what you do. So it also affects the music as well.
So we've got a bit of healing to do.
A lot. Because the problem with how we were traumatized as Black people, it was institutionalized. It's something that was planned at government level. So for the healing to start, it also has to start at government level.
Can I offer an alternative? So someone said to me, there was another interview that I had, and they said families can change nations. Instead of waiting for things to change at a national level, sometimes if we change the way that we are and that we relate within the family, which requires each one of us to take responsibility for ourselves, for our own personal growth, for our own healing, and then we take that healed, transformed self into relationship with another, it can actually transform our family. It can transform our neighborhoods. It will then, and all of that will then filter up.
Yeah, it's true. I agree with you. But at the same time, remember I said that if something was done coming from a government level, it's easier if it's approached at a government level as well.
Yeah.
I think it's more effective.
It's more effective. It is. It would happen a lot.
Because when the white people colonized us, they sat down. They did not just do it at random. They sat down and planned.
It was a plan.
It was a well-planned thing. So
a generational impact.
Exactly. Yeah. Because right now, we are still colonized, but the white people are not colonizing us.
We're not colonizing ourselves.
Because it was well-planned.
Yeah.
So for you to approach something that was well-planned with a plan that is just random, you won't win.
We'll be right back with you after these short commercials.
How I Produced It is an educational video essay series in which Mono Mukundu, a Zimbabwean award-winning music producer and multi-instrumentalist, provides a detailed analysis of the production process behind some of the classic songs he created at his Manolio studios.
Mono's ability to blend traditional Zimbabwean sounds with modern techniques is what sets him apart. It's a unique fusion that resonates globally.
Manolio Studio, the harmony of quality and professionalism.
Buju Banton has raised the issue of Afrobeats, right? Basically undermining us as people and undermining us culturally. That's the argument, is that some of the newer forms of music are not keeping us aligned with cultural values that can support our growth and support us to be stronger and have that self-confidence. Is that something you would agree with, or?
Yeah, I followed that issue with interest. Yeah, first of all, most people outside Africa, they view Africa as one small country, but Afrobeats is just Nigerian, Ghanaian. Number one. Number two, I think his points were very valid, because he was saying throughout the time when we were colonized, reggae music was fighting for Africa's decolonization. It was fighting for African unity and so forth. But the music that we are doing now, that we are free, we are busy talking about sex and having fun, and not talking about peace, not talking about living together and so forth. I think he had a point.
We've lost the balance.
Yeah, but of course he was talking about Afrobeats and he was talking about Nigeria, and I don't think it's the same everywhere. But since Nigeria got a breakthrough, right now I think most parts of Africa are trying to copy Nigeria, and they are copying that trend as well.
So my question there is, breakthrough to where and to what?
They had a huge breakthrough internationally with their music, because they managed to create a sub-genre of their music that was accepted worldwide. Because Nigerians have got that same advantage with Jamaicans. They believe in themselves. So they created a very successful sub-genre, which they call Afrobeats. Because before that, they had Afrobeat without an S. That was the Fela Kuti style. And they managed to create a new style, which they call Afrobeats with an S. And that one was...
But it's still rooted in the cultural expression.
Yeah,
even the dances are rooted in the traditional culture.
It's like modernizing Thomas Mafumo's music.
Yeah.
That's what they did.
Yeah. So what's stopping us from... We are doing that to a degree, though, aren't we?
No, we are not.
We're not?
We are not, because everybody's...
Okay.
Instead of copying the formula, the Nigerian formula, we are copying the Nigerians. You see the difference?
Oh, so now we just want to be Nigerian.
We want to be Nigerian. Because right now we've got a lot of artists in Zimbabwe who are trying to sound exactly like Nigerians.
Like Burna Boy.
Like Burna Boy. We've got a lot of Wiz kids in Zimbabwe, a lot of Burna Boys, a lot of Tiwa Savages in Zimbabwe right now. And if you try to talk to them about trying to find their own sound, about copying the formula, not copying the Nigerians, you are enemy number one.
I mean, listen, we can be enemy number one to those folks, but I feel like this show speaks to a group of people who are trying to find, copy the formula.
What they did is, I'm sure if you look at Burna Boy, sometimes he's wearing a necklace with a man raising his hands like this.
Yes.
That's Fela Kuti.
Right.
That was the father of Afrobeat.
Yes.
He's the one who created Afrobeat, and he was huge around the world. So what they did is they took that Afrobeat and borrowed a few elements from dancehall, a few elements from R&B, just tiny elements from other genres, and digitalized that genre. That's how they came up with Afrobeats. That's why they added an S, because they had stolen some tiny bits from everybody. In Jamaica, they were saying Afrobeats came from us, but that one I totally disagree with them. No. Afrobeats came from Fela Kuti's music, from Afrobeat. Because I used to follow Fela Kuti a lot, and you can hear a lot of Fela Kuti's music. The good thing about Nigerians is they admit where they took the things from. So if we are to copy that formula alone, we could take, for example, Oliver Mtugu's Thomas Mafumo. Their sound is very Zimbabwean, and they are not even the ones who created it. They just created sub-genres of Mbira music. You can take Mbira music as it is, or Thomas Mafumo's music, and try to digitalize it in a certain way that's very conducive with digitalization, and come up with something new. That's taking a formula. Now, instead of taking that formula, we are now busy trying to sound like Nigerians, singing like them, dancing like them, dressing like them. That's why none of them is going international. Because the international community respects someone who sounds like where they come from. They don't want another Burna Boy from Zimbabwe. They don't want another Wizkid from Zimbabwe, or another Amapiano artist from Zimbabwe. They want a Zimbabwean who sounds like a Zimbabwean. That's why if you notice, amongst the current generation, we don't have an international artist except for Mokomba. Mokomba is coming from Victoria Falls. That's the only international artist from the younger generation that we have.
And they're deeply embedded in their culture, expression.
Culture. Yeah. But remember, during the 90s, going backwards, with a long list of international artists. Thomas Mafumo, Oliver Mtukuzi, Stella Chiwese, Chonisu Maere, Bundu Boys, a lot of international artists, Blake Mfolosi, Yasa. Yeah, they were international because they were sounding Zimbabwean. And when I say people must sound Zimbabwean, I don't mean they should play Sungura or Chimurenga. You can even create something new, but that is Zimbabwean, that is our own. But our problem is we just think the word modern is synonymous with being foreign.
So this is the thing then. I'm wondering how much of this goes now into music theory, actually understanding how music is made, how a sound can transform or migrate from one cultural expression into another, but still maintain its roots. Because some people don't have that kind of training or the patience to listen to music, listen to the history of a sound, one, and understand the history of a sound, understand the history, like with reggae, to understand the roots of reggae, even like where reggae actually came from, because it came from somewhere.
Yeah, it did. They followed the history.
And it interacted with blues, but to understand where blues came from, you know. So are people educating themselves, or are they trying to be celebrities? Because there's a difference between being an artist and being a celebrity as well. There's a lot of work that goes into really understanding music. And I feel like Jamaicans really understand music.
Yeah, I think it's not really about the education part of it. I think it's rooted more in self-love more than anything else. Because that's one thing that lacks about Zimbabwe. Because in Zimbabwe, our music history dates back to the 1930s when industrialization started. That's when the music industry started as well. If you check from the 1930s up to now, we've had a history of foreign genres dominating in Zimbabwe. Each period of time had a foreign genre that dominated in Zimbabwe. And it goes back to colonization. Because when the white people came, they discouraged the playing of mbira. They discouraged the playing of ngoma.
Criminalized it.
Yeah, they criminalized it and demonized it.
You demonized it.
Because it was termed as heathen.
Yes.
If you play mbira, you
Savage.
could go to hell.
Yeah.
And so forth. So because of that, people just had a negative mindset towards our own music. That's why even in churches, I remember in 1995, I was invited to play at a church in Fakos. I was playing mbira guitar, and the church elder switched it off. They said, "You are playing an earthly sound. It's a demonic sound," just because I was playing a Zimbabwean guitar. So that mentality of having a negative view of our music, it also comes from colonization. It comes from religion. And then when people moved to Mbare, because Mbare was the only African township that time, they installed some loudspeakers where they would disseminate information to residents. And in between, they would play foreign music only. They would play jazz, they would play country music, and so forth. So people started calling it civilized music. So for you to be civilized or to be called civilized, you had to identify with American music. That's why even the first bands that started that time, they only wanted to play music that was from the West, jazz music, country music, something that white people could accept. If white people accepted it, then it was civilized. So it is what a mixture of religion and colonization and a lot of brainwashing that is very subtle. That's where the problem comes from.
And I think that actually might be Africa-wide. Even in Jamaica, I think people of a certain class tend to want to associate themselves with jazz, and everyone else associates themselves with other things.
Yeah, in Jamaica, when I went to Jamaica, I made sure that it was not a holiday. So I was visiting producers, radio stations, speaking to different people, and I got myself deep into the history of reggae music. And what you're saying is very true. When reggae music started, it was music for the ghettos. And rich people wanted to listen to jazz and some other genres. And even on radio, reggae music was not played on radio. And Bob Marley, Bunny Wailer, and Peter Tosh had to threaten radio DJs to play their music. That's how they started getting airplay. So they had to fight. So you find that people that are colonized worldwide, they almost have similar problems. They might come in different shades, genres of problems. I'll call them genres. but the problems are almost similar. Because one thing that colonialism and slavery brings to the subjects is self-hate. And it's subconscious. You just find yourself hating your language. You just find yourself hating anything that's associated with who you are. And that's exactly what happened to Zimbabweans. Because that problem was inherited. Because sometimes, like, remember what we said, we are now colonizing ourselves. You colonize yourselves by the stories that you talk about, even by the testimonies that you give in church. You tell, ladies and gentlemen, I'm now working with white people. Okay, so working with white people, it's something, and your kids are listening to you saying, you know what, he's so beautiful, he looks like a white man. She's so classy. You might think that she's a white woman. Those small little discussions, they'll be feeding into recolonization and recolonizing yourselves. So as Zimbabweans, we have recolonized ourselves so many times. So that idea of hating our own music is very historical. It dates back to the time the white people came to Zimbabwe. But I'm happy that slowly people are getting healed from it. Because right now, in churches, people can now play mbira guitar, can now play sungura and some other African genres. But of course, the mbira is not yet very welcome in church because they say that it was used during rituals, but they don't know that even the organ, the ancestor of the keyboard, was also used during European rituals. So there's a ritual they used to call epiclesis, where they would summon their own spirits. Before Christianity came, they used to use the organ, they used to use the harp. And people in Zimbabwe, in most parts of Africa, they are not aware. They just think it's only the mbira that was used to summon other spirits. But white people also used to have the same rituals using their own instruments, the same instruments that we believe fell from heaven, like the organ, the harp, and another instrument called sitara, which is an ancient ancestor of the guitar. It was also used at that time, and people are not aware.
That's profound. That's really interesting. I did not have any idea about that.
And at times, the mbira artists themselves, they shoot themselves in the foot. Instead of just entertaining people, they always want to bring in spirituality during their shows. You should stop that and concentrate on the music. One, that's how you can heal the people, to make them see that it's just an instrument. Music shows and so forth. You are shooting yourselves in the foot.
It's interesting, isn't it? Like, how do you actually go about the process of healing people? Isn't that like, shouldn't you just do it anyway and people will catch up later?
Yeah, like right now it's happening. If you search on YouTube, there are a lot of Pan-Africanist podcasts, and a lot of people are starting to see the light. It's slow, but it's not coming from the governments. It's just coming from the people themselves. So it's not as fast, but it doesn't mean that it's not happening.
Yeah.
It is happening right now, because a lot of people are beginning to open their eyes.
I think for me, what helped me, because there was a fear of the instrument at first, which fascinated me. I'm a curious person, and I'm a person who reflects and I question myself a lot. So I was like, why am I scared of? There's no reason why I should be. Where did this fear come from? Oh, and then the ancestors will come when you start playing it. Why am I scared of my own ancestors? If I'm supposed to become an ancestor one day, so why am I scared of myself? Oh, if I fear them and if I want to reject them, I'm rejecting myself. Oh, something's going on here. Where did this come from? Then it goes back to people like Malcolm X, who taught you to hate yourself.
Exactly.
Right?
And also the same in which I said we allowed them to describe our things. They'll tell you this is demonic. And then we accepted their
organ. Yeah. You do have a book out though that I would just like to tell
I've got 3 books so far. Yeah. But what happened is after I wrote the first 2 books, I went to college to do my first degree. And just 1 semester into the degree, I read my first 2 books and I was wondering, how did I leave so many mistakes? Yeah. That's why this year I released a new edition of my first book, which is autobiographical, called Following the Melody.
I love that. And we don't have autobiographies by Zimbabwe musicians. So
I was talking to Albert Nyati, Chirukuri Chirukuri, and all these other big authors, and they were telling me you are the first musician to write his own autobiography. And I was surprised.
So we don't have legacy, like you're saying, that legacy. And
No, we
that
don't.
it's also another way of mentoring.
But we do have
people.
other musicians whose biographies were written by other authors. But it's difficult because at times some of the biographies were written by people who had fallen out with them.
And that's, I mean, leaving behind those biographies is also another way of sharing formula.
Exactly. That's why if you read my book, I mention every mistake that I have made, even those that most people would be ashamed to speak about. I mentioned everything so that when somebody is reading it, when a new artist or somebody aspiring to get into the music industry, if they read it, they know, okay, I think I'm not supposed to do this. I'm not supposed to do this. So I think if all artists do that, it helps a lot to mentor the next generations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So we'll be seeing you soon. I hope.
Thank you.
Monoversation.